There's a truth that almost no one dares to admit, but it's silently destroying the spiritual lives of millions. The closer you get to God, the fiercer the war within you becomes. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not that you're backing away. It's not that your faith is fading. It's that your spirit has awakened and your flesh knows it. That's why the struggle intensifies. That's why you feel pulled in two opposite directions. That's why you wonder why. If you love God, you still feel impulses that draw you toward what hurts you, and here comes the warning that very few want to accept. The fiercest battle isn't fought outside, but inside, in that place where only you and God know what's really going on. But listen to this. If you feel that tension today more than ever, you're not losing. You're living. You're breathing spiritually. You're being claimed by heaven. It's evidence that your soul no longer belongs to comfortable darkness, but to the light that unsettles, the light that reveals, the light that confronts. And while some interpret that struggle as failure, the Bible calls it a sign of life. Because only the living fight, only the awake feel the shock, only those in whom Christ dwells know the violence of this inner war. I want to invite you to stay until the end of this video, because there I'm going to give you a spiritual key that can completely change how you face this battle. It's not an emotional trick, nor a cliche. It's a biblical revelation that, if you embrace it, can break internal chains you've carried for years. And before we continue, let me ask you something with brutal honesty. Have you recently felt like you're torn apart? As if one part of you is seeking God while another pulls you away from Him? If so, please share your story in the comments. I want to read it and pray for you, because this war is not a mistake. It is a calling. And that calling has just awakened you with a force you may not yet understand, but which could very soon transform everything under a sky that still watches you in silence. That feeling of being divided, of feeling that within you there are two voices fighting for control, is neither accidental nor coincidental. It is the echo of a spiritual reality that many try to ignore, but which never ceases to claim its place. When you said that this war is tearing you apart, when you confessed that one part of your soul runs toward God while another runs toward what hurts you, you revealed something profound. You are in territory where only those who live in Christ can walk. And although it may seem confusing, although it hurts, although it may seem unfair, that the path to God is not smooth but turbulent, that turbulence is the language of the sacred when it tries to awaken something you yourself didn't know was dormant. The flesh craves silence, comfort, numbness. It wants you to live on autopilot, reacting, falling, repeating cycles, embracing what destroys you while convincing you that you can't change. But the spirit craves movement. It craves light. It craves struggle. Not a struggle to condemn you, but a struggle to rise up. That's why you feel something inside you won't let you give up, even when your strength is depleted. That inner resistance, that invisible trembling, that small whisper that insists there is still hope, is evidence that you are not alone, that you are not adrift. That heaven continues to push your soul upward, even when everything around you invites you to descend. And this is where you begin to realize what's truly at stake. It's not just about temptations, emotions, or habits. It's about your spiritual identity. The battle isn't about what you do, but about who you're becoming. That's why it hurts so much. That's why it unsettles you. That's why it confronts you at your core. Because you're not fighting for a behavior, but for a destiny. And when the enemy senses you're approaching the purpose for which you were created, it ignites internal wars that threaten to break you from within. Tell me something with burning honesty. How many times have you felt like you're about to give up, but something, you don't know what, prevents you from letting go completely? Leave it in the comments. You can't imagine how many souls can find comfort in your truth, because that mysterious resistance that appears when all seems lost may not be yours. Perhaps it is the first sign that heaven is about to reclaim what has always been its own. When you feel that resistance within you, that force that appears just when you're about to give up, it's not by chance. It's as if something deep, something ancient, something that knows you better than you know yourself, refuses to let go. That resistance doesn't stem from human pride or empty discipline. It springs from a spirit that has begun to awaken, a spirit that remembers where it belongs, even when your mind is confused. And although on the outside you may seem to be fighting alone, inside there is a silent movement, an invisible push that sustains you when your own strength has run out. It is in that inner place where no one else enters that the fiercest battle is fought. Paul described it with brutal honesty, "For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want." And perhaps you too have felt that clash, that uncomfortable pull between what you desire spiritually and what your flesh urgently demands. It is not a simple moral conflict. It is a clash of kingdoms, a dispute over your identity. The flesh reminds you who you were, while the Spirit reveals who you are destined to be. And that tension, far from being a punishment, is proof that your soul can no longer live anesthetized as before. Something within you has ignited. Something within you has remembered that you were created to walk with God, not to survive disconnected from Him. That's why, even if you fall, something inside you feels uneasy. Even if you fail, something hurts differently. Even when you distance yourself, something prevents you from enjoying the distance. That unease is a silent witness that you no longer belong to the life that once seemed enough. It's as if the sky has left a mark on your spirit, an indelible sign that calls to you even when you hide. And the more you try to return to the old version of yourself, the more two forces within you clash that cannot coexist peacefully. Because when the spirit begins to reclaim what belongs to it, the flesh despairs, and the soul begins to hear a whisper that can transform everything if you dare to recognize where it comes from. That whisper that begins to awaken within you, that soft yet unmistakable call that interrupts your old desires, is not born of emotion or guilt. It is the trace of a presence that has never ceased to follow you. When the spirit reclaims what belongs to it, the flesh feels it is losing ground, and so it intensifies its noise, its urgencies, its distractions. It pushes you to run, to escape, to fill your emptiness with the immediate, the easy, with what only soothes for a few minutes. But the Spirit does not act like that. The Spirit does not shout, does not despair, does not pressure. The Spirit calls, attracts, illuminates. Its voice does not impose, it convinces. And that is why this war hurts so much, because a part of you wants to let go of everything and return to the comfort you once knew. But another part, deeper, truer, cannot bear the thought of returning to the darkness of before. The human heart, Jeremiah says, is deceitful. It can clothe the flesh in good intentions and disguise destruction with promises of relief. It tells you that it's okay, that you'll change tomorrow, that a small detour doesn't matter. But the Spirit never bargains with what is killing you. The Spirit confronts you, even when you don't want to listen. It shows you the truth you try to ignore and reminds you that you were created for much more than surviving on impulse. That's why, when you feel torn between two paths, it's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you are awakening to a spiritual reality that was always there, waiting for you. And in that reality, you discover that it's not the outside world that threatens you most, but that internal battle that defines which voice will be your guide. You're not fighting against superficial habits. You're fighting for your eternal destiny, for the version of you that God saw before your wounds shaped you. Because when the Spirit begins to illuminate areas you previously preferred to keep in shadow, a revelation arises that can change everything if you have the courage to face it head-on. That revelation that begins to emerge when the light touches what you once hid isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. It's as if God were showing you not only what's distancing you from him, but also what he's stealing from you. When that clarity arrives, you can no longer lie to yourself in the same way. You can no longer justify the shadows with old excuses. You can no longer say, "It's not that bad," because your spirit begins to feel the true weight of what your flesh sold you as innocent. And there, in that clash between what your flesh wants to hide and what your spirit wants to reveal, you discover that the inner battle isn't between an imaginary angel and demon, but between a self that wants to keep dying and a self that is beginning to truly live. Romans 8:13 states it bluntly, "If by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live." This verse isn't about morality, it's about spiritual survival. The flesh doesn't seek to give you life. It only wants to give you momentary pleasure in exchange for consequences that arrive slowly, but they do arrive. The Spirit, on the other hand, offers you a life that you may not yet understand, but that your soul recognizes as soon as it feels it. That's why there are times when you know God is calling you to let go of something, even though you don't yet have the strength to release it. You know that something inside you is suffocating when you give in to what you once celebrated. You know that your tears are no longer just sadness. They are signs that a part of you is rebelling against a slavery disguised as freedom. And the stronger that revelation becomes, the more evident it becomes that this war isn't simply a resistance to sin, but a resistance to losing your true identity. It's a struggle against the broken version you were taught to accept as final. It's a clash with the inner lie that tells you you'll never change. And in the midst of that conflict, a question arises that you can't ignore, a question that defines where your soul leans when no one is watching. Because when the Spirit shows you the truth about yourself, it does not do so to accuse you, but to prepare you for the transformation that is about to reclaim what was always its own. When the Spirit begins to prepare your inner self for true transformation, the first thing it does is confront you with the question you fear most. Who are you willing to stop being to become who God called you to be? That question hurts because it's not about letting go of a habit, but an identity you built to survive. The flesh whispers that without that escape, without that pattern, without that mask, you will be left empty. But the Spirit knows that this emptiness is precisely the space where something new can be born. That's why it persists. That's why it doesn't leave you in peace. That's why it wakes you in the middle of the night with that inexplicable weight, that thought that won't go away, that conviction that follows you even when you try to ignore it. It's not condemnation, it's preparation. The heart, as deceitful as Jeremiah warned, wants to lead you down the familiar path, even if that path destroys you. It tells you not to change what brings you immediate relief, even if that relief costs you your peace. But the Spirit operates with a different strategy. It reminds you that the suffering of letting go of something temporary is nothing compared to the freedom that follows. The discomfort you feel now is not punishment. It is the birth of a new nature within you. It is the breaking of an old skin that can no longer hold what God wants to deposit in your soul. And this is where many feel afraid, because when God prepares you for something greater, He doesn't begin by changing your surroundings. He begins by changing you from within. He breaks silent chains, dismantles mental structures, and reveals wounds you've carried for so long that you believed they were part of you. And although at first it may seem like you're losing, you're actually being set free. Because the Spirit does not expose to humiliate, it exposes to heal. It does not reveal to shame, it reveals to rebuild. And while that inner work continues, a deep, almost uncontrollable disquiet arises. A disquiet that makes you wonder why, if God is transforming you, the war within you still intensifies, as if something were desperately resisting letting go of its last bit of space. That desperate resistance you feel when the Spirit begins to advance is not accidental. It is the unmistakable sign that something within you is losing power. The flesh, when it sees you awakening, does not remain still. It clings to its last remaining territories, hurls thoughts at you that previously did not affect you, desires you thought you had overcome resurface, doubts that seemed buried appear. Not because you are retreating, but because you are about to break a cycle that has fed on your silence for years. It is the typical behavior of a nature that knows it is being displaced by a life greater than itself. When the flesh senses that the spirit is gaining ground, it fights its last battle with an intensity that is frightening, but which also reveals that the end of that dominion is near. It is at this point that many believe they are failing. They ask themselves, why am I more tempted now than before? Why is my mind so agitated? Why do my emotions feel like a storm? But what they don't see is that the storm is evidence of movement, not defeat. It is the noise a structure makes when it is about to collapse. It is the trembling of a spiritual stronghold that has ruled your inner self for too long and is now yielding to the presence of God's Spirit. And although it may seem that everything is getting worse, it is actually a sign that something is changing on levels beyond your understanding. When you're one step away from breaking free from a pattern, your flesh offers you its best lie. You can't change, you won't make it, you're always like this. But your spirit, strengthened by God's silent work, begins to respond with a new conviction, almost imperceptible yet firm. It's not a shout, it's an awakening. It's not euphoria, it's determination. It's not a fleeting emotion. It's an inner movement that compels you to choose life even when death in disguise is still calling your name. And there, right on that threshold where the flesh tries to claim you and the spirit propels you towards the eternal, a truth is formed that is not learned in theories but in battle. A truth that can completely redefine how you understand this war that burns inside you. That truth that begins to take shape in the midst of the battle doesn't come from theory, but from the fire you're experiencing within. The flesh fights to hold you back, but the spirit battles to reveal who you truly are. And when that revelation begins to break through, you discover something that changes everything. The war doesn't prove your weakness, it proves your belonging. No one fights for what has no value. No one strives to recover what is already dead. The intensity of your struggle is evidence that you are a contested spiritual territory, a soul marked by God that the enemy doesn't want to let go of. And when that understanding sinks in, you begin to see the storm differently. Temptation ceases to be just guilt, it becomes a sign. Exhaustion ceases to be failure, it becomes an indication of progress. Resistance ceases to be an obstacle, it becomes proof that the spirit is gaining ground. That's when you understand why this battle hurts so much. You're not fighting to maintain a lifestyle, you're fighting to reclaim your eternal identity. The flesh wants to remind you of your falls, your mistakes, your darkest moments. It wants to lock you in the past because it knows that a believer who understands who they are in Christ becomes dangerous. But the Spirit shows you a version of yourself you may never have seen, a free, whole, radiant version, capable of walking in obedience without fear and without chains. That vision doesn't come from the imagination. It comes from the divine seed that God planted in you before you were born. And that seed, when it begins to sprout, makes everything that doesn't come from Him uncomfortable. Even so, there's a crucial point in this struggle where everything is defined, the moment you decide which nature to nurture. It's not magic, it's not emotion, it's a daily decision. The flesh thrives on the immediate, the spirit on the eternal. The flesh feeds on impulses, the spirit on presence. The flesh offers you relief, the spirit offers you freedom. And every choice, even the smallest ones, tips the scales toward life or inner death. But just when that decision seems most difficult, When you feel you don't have the strength to choose the eternal over the urgent, a spiritual movement arises that reveals why this war doesn't depend solely on your ability, but on something and someone much greater than you. That someone greater than you is the reason this war has never finished destroying you, because if it depended solely on your strength, you would have already fallen. If it were only about discipline, you would have already given in. But Romans 8:13 doesn't say, if you put to death the flesh, it says, if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body. It is the Spirit who fights from within, who lifts you up when you can't anymore, who intercedes when you have no words, who sustains the part of you that longs for God, even when your mind is exhausted. And it is at that point that you understand that it is not you trying to cling to God. It is God clinging to you with a strength that your weakness cannot overcome. That's why, even if you feel tempted to roar, even if your thoughts become clouded, even if your emotions seem rebellious, there is a presence within you that does not give up. A presence that has accompanied you through every fall, every attempt, every secret struggle that no one knows about. That presence is not just comfort, it is power. A power that doesn't demand perfection to manifest itself, only sincerity. Because God doesn't strengthen those who pretend, He strengthens those who truly surrender. And when you surrender, when you confess your need, when you admit you can't do it alone, that's when the battle begins to shift. It doesn't disappear, but it changes hands. It ceases to be your battle and becomes the battle of the Spirit within you. But even so, something deeper is happening. Every time you choose the Spirit over the flesh, even with trembling, something within you is reorganized. You don't notice it at first, but your soul begins to regain stability, your mind begins to clear, and your heart begins to desire what it once rejected. It's as if God is rebuilding your inner self brick by brick, until one day you discover that you react differently, think differently, and desire differently. And it is precisely in that process, when you begin to transform without realizing it, that a silent but urgent question arises, one that many avoid because it confronts the deepest root of this inner war. What part of you continues to resist surrendering completely? That part that still resists, that last hidden stronghold, that voice that whispers, "Don't give this up yet," is usually not an obvious sin, but a deep attachment. Sometimes it's a wound you're afraid to open, a relationship you don't want to let go of, a habit that protects you from pain, an identity you built to avoid feeling vulnerable. It's not always malice, sometimes it's fear disguised as reasoning. And it's precisely there that the Spirit works hardest, because that area is what defines whether you'll live a life guided by heaven or an existence ruled by your own scars. When the Spirit touches those areas, it doesn't do so to shame you, but to free you from the burden you've carried for so long that you've come to believe it is you. But the flesh, perceiving this threat, clings on, convinces you that letting go will destroy you, and makes you believe that if you relinquish that last space, you'll lose a part of yourself. What it doesn't tell you is that this is precisely where your true transformation begins. It is at this point that the battle becomes more emotional than spiritual. Because even though you know God is calling you, you also know that answering means dying to a version of yourself that still provides you with security. And dying is frightening. Not just dying to a sin, but dying to an identity, to a mechanism, to a place where you've hidden for years. That's why the struggle intensifies, because you are one step away from ceasing to live by instinct and beginning to live by purpose. And when that moment arrives, something in your soul begins to tremble, not from fear, but from recognition. You know that if you surrender that last corner, God will do in you what you always wanted, but could never achieve on your own. Here I want to ask you a profound question, not to expose you, but to accompany you. What is that area you know God is asking of you that you haven't yet surrendered? Write it in the comments if you dare. I want to read it and pray with you from that place where it hurts, but also where freedom begins. Because admitting it is the first step toward the surrender that transforms. And when you finally decide to face that area that avoids the light, when you begin to recognize that you no longer want to be governed by it, something unexpected happens. The inner war begins to reveal which of the two voices has been defining your destiny, and which one is ready to lead your life down a path you never imagined was possible. And when that revelation arrives, when you discover which voice has guided you and which has limited you, you begin to realize that the real battle was never against the outside world, but against the internal narrative you accepted as truth. The flesh will always speak in the immediate future. Do what you feel, don't complicate things, no one will notice, just this once. But the Spirit speaks in eternity. This shapes you, this liberates you, this transforms you. One aims at survival, the other at awakening, and in that clash, perhaps for the first time, you begin to see clearly that your greatest enemy wasn't temptation, but the broken version of yourself that learned to love what was destroying it. That's when we understand why Paul said he saw another law in his members, trying to pull him away from God. It wasn't weakness, it was humanity. It was evidence that spiritual life was struggling to emerge, because if there were no light within you, the darkness wouldn't fight so hard to maintain its territory. And if there were no purpose, you wouldn't feel this weight that tears you apart every time you choose what's right. That discomfort isn't condemnation, it's proof that the Holy Spirit hasn't let go of you, even though you yourself have given up. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not feeling peace, but continuing to move forward even when you don't feel it. We think spiritual victory is euphoria, but often it's silent obedience. It's saying to God, I don't understand, but here I am. It's staying when you wanted to run away. It's closing a door that no one will applaud. It's forgiving without the other person asking for forgiveness. It's giving up something you still desire, because you love the one who called you more. That's the kind of warfare the flesh will never understand, but the Spirit celebrates deep within. And right there, as the conflict rages, a question arises that not everyone dares to confront. Who is truly taking control of your heart when no one is watching? Don't answer quickly, think about it. Because that moment of sincerity can become the precise point where the Spirit begins to reclaim lost ground. And when you allow that light to enter, even through a crack, something in your soul begins to stir with a force that doesn't come from within you, a force that announces the battle is reaching a decisive point, one where feeling is no longer enough, but choosing is essential. And it is in that moment of choice, when your soul is weary, your flesh is screaming, and your spirit is barely whispering, that the greatest mystery of life with God occurs. He doesn't expect perfection. He expects surrender. He doesn't ask you to arrive strong, but to arrive honest. He doesn't demand immediate purity, but a heart that says, Lord, I can't do it without you. Because the war between the flesh and the Spirit is never won by sheer willpower. It is won when you recognize that you weren't designed to fight alone. The Spirit didn't come to be a spectator of your struggle. He came to be your strength, your guide, your power to do what you could never do on your own. There are battles that aren't won in the moment, but along the way. And today, even though you feel chaos inside, even though it seems like you're taking 2 steps toward God and 1 toward your old nature, I want you to understand something profound. You're not going backward, you're being transformed. Transformation always hurts before it liberates. The soul always trembles before it surrenders. The flesh always cries out before it dies. But the death of the flesh isn't your end. It's the birth of a version of yourself you never knew, a version capable of loving without fear, obeying without resistance, walking without guilt, and trusting unconditionally. Therefore, if you are at war, do not be ashamed. The dead do not fight, only the living feel the struggle. That tension within you is not a sign of condemnation. It is a sign that heaven continues to fight for your heart. Every time you choose the Spirit, even in something small, you are opening a door through which God builds your victory. And when that door opens, even just a crack, the light always ends up entering. Today I want to ask you one last question, perhaps the most important one in this entire message. Which voice will you nurture after this video ends? Because what you feed grows and what you neglect dies. If you decide to feed your spirit, even if it's with clumsy steps, God will do the rest. He doesn't call you to be perfect. He calls you to be His. And when you are His, no internal struggle has the final say. If this message touched you deeply, write in the comments, "I want to choose the Spirit." Not for others to see, but as a public act of decision, as an invisible declaration to the heavens that this time you will not fight alone. Because when you choose the Spirit chooses you for the freedom you have always dreamed of. And in that freedom, your life truly begins.